Doris Day. The name alone conjures images of sunshine, laughter, and innocence. To millions of fans around the world, she was the picture of perfection, the all-American girl next door with the radiant smile and the golden voice. She was the woman who made everything seem lighter, brighter, and happier. When you watched Doris Day on screen, it was like being wrapped in a warm blanket of charm and optimism. She seemed untouchable, the perfect Hollywood star without scandal, without flaws, without shadows. But here's the shocking truth. That image was a carefully built illusion. Behind the dazzling smile and wholesome persona was a woman who had lived through pain, betrayal, loss, and heartbreak that few people knew about. If Hollywood is the land of make-believe, Doris Day was its crown jewel. She was the face of the 1950s and 1960s, one of the most popular actresses and singers of her time. Her songs topped the charts, her films broke box office records, and she became a household name in America and beyond. But with every bright light, there is a shadow. And Doris carried hers quietly, almost invisibly, while the world believed she lived in endless sunshine. For years, the public only saw the Doris who sang "Que Sera, Sarah," the Doris who giggled her way through romantic comedies with Rock Hudson, the Doris who danced in musicals filled with joy. No one was allowed to see the woman behind the curtain, the one who had suffered, the one who had been betrayed, the one who wanted nothing more than to live a simple, peaceful life away from the chaos of Hollywood. That's the story we're about to tell you. Because the truth is, Doris Day's life was full of secrets. Shocking, heartbreaking, and deeply human secrets. These were truths she often hid from the public eye. Truths that clashed with the carefully maintained image of America's sweetheart. She wasn't just a Hollywood fantasy. She was a woman who faced battles that most of us couldn't imagine. And in some ways, that makes her more relatable, more admirable, and more unforgettable than the perfect image ever did. Think about this. While Doris Day was making audiences laugh on screen, she was surviving abusive marriages in private. While the public saw her as the wealthiest, most glamorous actress in Hollywood, behind the scenes she was nearly bankrupt, betrayed by the very people she trusted most. While she appeared to live a life of romance and luxury, she was often lonely, yearning for stability that constantly slipped away. Her story is not just one of fame, it's one of resilience. But here's what makes Doris Day truly fascinating. She kept these secrets close, rarely allowing them to spill into the public eye. She wanted to protect her fans, to protect her carefully built image, and maybe even to protect herself. Because in Hollywood, once the illusion breaks, it's nearly impossible to put it back together. And yet, the older she grew, the more some of these secrets came to light. Slowly, the world began to see the real Doris. Complicated, flawed, strong, and unforgettable. Over the next chapters, we're going to reveal 8 shocking secrets Doris Day carried with her. Truths that even her most devoted fans didn't know at the time. We'll talk about the identity she left behind when she became Doris Day. We'll uncover the pain of her abusive first marriage and how it shaped her future. We'll explore how her greatest dream was stolen from her, forcing her into a career she never planned on. We'll look at the betrayal that left her bankrupt at the peak of her success. We'll uncover her complicated relationship with her son, the trauma that came with it, and the way she fiercely tried to protect him. We'll see how, despite all the glitz, she eventually abandoned Hollywood and devoted her life to a cause that truly mattered to her. And we'll uncover the most startling secret of all, the way she chose to leave this world quietly, without the fanfare you would expect from a legend of her size. When people hear the name Doris Day, they immediately think of sunshine. It sounds light, cheerful, and effortless, like a new dawn breaking over the horizon. And that was exactly the point. But behind that name was a very different reality. You see, Doris Day wasn't born Doris Day at all. She was born Doris Marion Kappelhoff in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1922. Kappelhoff was a name that reflected her family's German ancestry, a name that tied her to her roots and her heritage. But Hollywood had no interest in complicated surnames, and America in the 1930s and 1940s wasn't a particularly forgiving place for people with German backgrounds. The world was on edge, the shadow of Nazi Germany looming larger by the day, and anti-German sentiment in the United States was running high. Having a name like Kappelhoff wasn't just a mouthful for a movie poster. It was also a liability. Doris had started her career as a singer long before she became a Hollywood star. She was working with bandleaders, traveling the country, and trying to make her mark. One night, after performing, a bandleader named Barney Rapp looked at her and said bluntly that Kappelhoff was never going to work. It was too long, too foreign-sounding, and just didn't fit the image of the breezy, accessible young star he wanted to market. He thought her voice had a sunny, fresh quality to it, light and easy like the passing of a day. Inspired by a song she had sung called Day After Day, he suggested she adopt the name Doris Day. At first, it might have seemed like a simple change, just a practical adjustment for show business. But in reality, it was the beginning of a new identity. By leaving behind Kappelhoff, Doris was leaving behind a part of herself, a part of her family, and a part of her truth. It was a sacrifice she made willingly at the time, because she wanted to succeed. But it was also a secret she carried for the rest of her career, that the perfect Doris Day was, in fact, someone else entirely. Imagine the pressure of that. At just 20 years old, you're told that your real name, the one your family gave you, isn't good enough. You're asked to shed it, to become someone new, and to carry that new identity for the rest of your life. It might sound minor compared to some of the other hardships Doris endured, but it speaks volumes about the world she was stepping into. Hollywood was a place that demanded reinvention, where authenticity often took a back seat to marketability. And Doris was no exception. She learned early that to survive in show business you had to play a role, not just on screen but in life. What's even more fascinating is how perfectly the name Doris Day fit the image that was later created for her. With that sunny surname, she became the embodiment of optimism. People believed she was the girl next door who could do no wrong, the wholesome woman every man wanted to marry and every woman wanted as a best friend. But underneath, Doris was far more complex. She wasn't just Day. She was still Kappelhoff, a young woman with insecurities, ambitions, and struggles. The name change created a gap between the public Doris and the private Doris, a gap that would only widen as her career skyrocketed. She once admitted in interviews later in life that the name never truly felt like hers. It belonged to the image, to the career, to the legend. Kappelhoff was who she really was, but Day was who she had to be in order to survive in Hollywood. And that disconnect followed her for decades. Even after she retired from films, people still thought of her as Doris Day, the eternal sweetheart, rather than as Doris the person. When we think of shocking secrets, we often expect tales of scandal, crime, or betrayal. But sometimes the most shocking truths are the quiet ones. In Doris's case, her very identity was altered at the start of her career. And while the world never knew her as Kappelhoff, she carried that hidden truth silently. To her family, she would always be Doris Kappelhoff. To the world, she was Doris Day. And the two identities rarely met. This wasn't unique to Doris, of course. Many stars of her era were forced to change their names. Archibald Leach became Cary Grant. Frances Gumm became Judy Garland. Marion Morrison became John Wayne. But what makes Doris's case so striking is how deeply the new name shaped her destiny. The entire Doris Day persona, the sunny, wholesome, unshakably optimistic character, was built on the foundation of that name change. Without it, perhaps she would never have become the legend we know. And yet, that also means the legend was, in some way, built on a carefully maintained secret. So the first shocking secret Doris Day hid from the world was her very identity. She wasn't born the woman we think we know. She wasn't always the cheerful Day who lit up the screen. She was Doris Kappelhoff, a girl from Cincinnati who had to erase a part of herself in order to become a star. And for the rest of her life, she lived in the space between those two names, carrying the weight of the one the world was never supposed to see. When audiences looked at Doris Day, they saw happiness. She was the smiling blonde with the sparkling eyes, the woman who seemed to embody everything wholesome and sweet about mid-century America. But if they had peered behind the screen, behind the glossy magazine covers and publicity photos, they would have seen something much darker. At the age of just 19, Doris Day entered into a marriage that would nearly destroy her. a marriage marked not by romance, but by abuse, control, and fear. The man's name was Al Jordan, a trombonist she had met while touring as a singer with Barney Rapp's band. At first glance, Jordan was charming and talented, but beneath the surface lay a storm of jealousy and violence. Doris, young and impressionable, believed she was in love. She imagined a life filled with music, stability, and companionship. But instead she walked straight into a nightmare. From the start, Jordan's temper was explosive. He was possessive to the point of paranoia, convinced that Doris was being unfaithful whenever she so much as spoke to another man. His jealousy turned into rage, and that rage turned into violence. Doris would later describe him as a psychopathic jealous maniac, words that reveal the terror she endured during that brief but traumatic marriage. What makes this secret so shocking is how it clashes with the image of Doris Day that Hollywood carefully constructed. On screen, she was the eternal romantic, the woman who found love and laughter in every situation. Off-screen, she was a teenage bride trapped in an abusive relationship, suffering silently. She kept the pain hidden, even as she continued to sing with the big bands, putting on a brave face for the public while her private life was crumbling. The marriage became even more complicated when Doris discovered she was pregnant. For many women, the news of a child brings joy, but for Doris, it brought more fear. Jordan wanted her to have an abortion. He didn't want the child, and he pressured her to end the pregnancy. But Doris refused. She wanted the baby, and she would not allow Jordan to take that away from her. This defiance only escalated his anger. Eventually, Doris gave birth to her only child, a son named Terry. But the abuse did not stop. If anything, Jordan grew even more unstable. Doris knew she had to get out, not just for herself, but for her child. In 1943, after only a few years of marriage, she left him. Shortly after, Jordan took his own life. Doris rarely spoke about this chapter of her life publicly, but when she did, her words carried the weight of someone who had survived a harrowing ordeal. Imagine what that must have been like for a young woman not yet 21 years old, to endure abuse, to fight for the life of her unborn child, and then to deal with the aftermath of her husband's suicide. These were the experiences that shaped Doris long before she ever set foot on a Hollywood set. They were scars that never truly faded, even as she built a career on laughter and song. For her fans, the revelation of Doris's abusive first marriage came as a shock. How could the woman who represented sweetness and purity have lived through such darkness? But that's the truth of Doris Day. She was not the one-dimensional character the studios marketed. She was a survivor. And survival became a theme that ran throughout her life, again and again. It's worth noting that Doris's devotion to her son Terry was born out of this struggle. He was the one good thing to come from an otherwise destructive marriage. Doris raised him largely on her own, pouring into him the love and protection she never received from his father. Terry would grow up to become a successful music producer, working with artists like the Beach Boys and the Byrds. But his relationship with Doris would later be complicated in its own ways. Another story we'll come to later. Looking back, Doris often reflected on how that first marriage hardened her, teaching her lessons about resilience and independence. She may have played the innocent ingenue on screen, but in real life, she had faced more hardship by the age of 20 than many people do in a lifetime. Perhaps that's why she was so convincing in her roles as strong-willed women, women who could stand up to men, women who weren't afraid to be bold. Because beneath the costume and makeup, Doris wasn't acting. She was drawing from her own lived experience. So, while the world was captivated by Doris Day's radiant smile, very few knew the truth. That behind that smile was a woman who had already survived abuse, betrayal, and loss. Her abusive first marriage wasn't just a hidden chapter in her life. It was a defining one. It shaped the way she approached relationships, the way she guarded herself, and the way she carried her private pain with grace and dignity, never allowing it to shatter the illusion of Doris Day the star. And that is the second shocking secret Doris Day hid from the world, that America's sweetheart was, in her earliest years of adulthood, a victim of abuse. A young woman who had to fight for her life, her dignity, and the future of her only child. To the outside world, Doris Day's career looked like a dream. Who wouldn't want to be one of the most beloved singers and actresses of the 20th century? She recorded more than 650 songs, starred in nearly 40 films, and was one of the top box office draws of the 1960s. But here's a truth that might surprise you. Doris Day never wanted any of it. Her first passion wasn't singing or acting. It was dancing. As a child in Cincinnati, Doris trained seriously as a dancer. She idolized performers like Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, and she dreamed of one day following in their footsteps. She had natural grace, rhythm, and an unshakable work ethic. By her teenage years, she was preparing for a future on stage, and her mother, who saw her daughter's gift, supported her every step of the way. But fate had other plans. When Doris was just 13, tragedy struck. She was riding in a car that collided with a train. The crash shattered her leg, leaving her with a compound fracture so severe that doctors told her she might never walk properly again, let alone dance. 4 months, she was confined to her bed, her dreams slipping further away with each passing day. It was during this long and painful recovery that Doris began singing. She would listen to the radio and hum along to the popular songs of the day. Her voice was soft at first, tentative, but soon it grew stronger. Singing became a form of therapy, a way to pass the time and distract herself from the crushing disappointment of her lost dream. Her mother noticed the gift and encouraged her to take lessons. Before long, Doris was singing on local radio shows and performing with dance bands. Her big break came when she joined Les Brown and his band of renown. In 1945, she recorded Sentimental Journey with them, and the song became an anthem for soldiers returning home from World War II. Practically overnight, Doris was famous. But here's the irony. Even as her star rose, Doris never fully embraced the career that was unfolding before her. She often said that singing was something she stumbled into, not something she chased. Acting, too, came later almost by accident. She was cast in the film Romance on the High Seas in 1948 when another actress dropped out. The movie was a hit, and suddenly, Doris Day the film star was born. Yet behind her smile and professionalism, Doris sometimes resented the path she had been forced onto. Dancing had been her true love, and that dream had been taken from her in an instant by a car accident. Singing and acting brought her fame and fortune, but they were built on the ashes of what she had really wanted. This secret adds a bittersweet layer to her legacy. The world adored her movies and cherished her songs, but Doris herself often saw them as second best. She once admitted in interviews that she never watched her own films, and she often referred to her acting career as something that just happened. For someone who achieved so much, there was always an undercurrent of what if. It makes you wonder, if that accident had never happened, would the world have ever known Doris Day at all? Or would Doris Kappelhoff, the dancer from Cincinnati, have lived an entirely different life, far from the bright lights of Hollywood? The third shocking secret of Doris Day's life is that the career we all celebrate was not the career she wanted. It was the career fate handed her after tragedy took away her first dream. And though she wore the mask of joy and ease, a part of her always longed for the dance floor she lost as a teenager. By the mid-1950s, Doris Day had become Hollywood's queen of romantic comedies and musicals. She was known for her light, breezy performances, the perfect partner for actors like Rock Hudson, James Garner, and Gordon MacRae. So when Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, cast her in The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1956, the public was stunned. Doris Day in a thriller seemed unthinkable. What the world didn't know was that Doris herself nearly turned the role down. She didn't believe she was right for it. Hitchcock was convinced otherwise. He saw something in her that no one else did, a vulnerability beneath the cheerful surface, a depth of emotion that could make his story more powerful. Doris was hesitant, but she trusted him. The film cast her opposite James Stewart, another actor known for his wholesome image but capable of extraordinary depth. Together, they told the story of an American couple caught in an international conspiracy, their child kidnapped by assassins. Doris's role required her to show anguish, fear, and determination, emotions the public had rarely seen from her before. There's one scene that became iconic: Doris singing "Que Sera Sera" to signal to her kidnapped son that she was nearby. The song itself almost didn't make it into the film. Doris reportedly disliked it, finding it too simple and childish. But Hitchcock insisted, and the result was magic. The song not only won the Academy Award for Best Original Song but also became Doris Day's signature, the anthem that would define her career. Behind the scenes, though, Doris wrestled with self-doubt. She wasn't sure she could handle such a dramatic role. She worried that audiences wouldn't accept her outside of comedy and musicals. But when the film was released, the critics praised her performance, noting the emotional weight she brought to the part. Hitchcock's gamble had paid off, and Doris proved she was far more versatile than anyone had given her credit for. The shocking secret here isn't just that Doris Day nearly turned down one of the most important roles of her career. It's that she spent much of her life doubting her own talent. To her fans, she was radiant and flawless, a natural star. But to Doris herself, she was often just getting by, taking roles because they were offered, not because she felt she was the best choice. She didn't see herself as the legend she became. It's a reminder that even the brightest stars can be filled with insecurity. Doris Day, the woman who made millions laugh and cry, often questioned whether she was truly good enough. And yet, in moments like The Man Who Knew Too Much, she proved that she was not only good enough, she was unforgettable. If Doris Day's life had a cruel twist, it came in the late 1960s. By then, she was one of the highest-paid stars in Hollywood. She had earned millions from her films, her music, and her television appearances. To the public, she was living the dream: a mansion, a glamorous lifestyle, and financial security. But the reality was devastatingly different. When her third husband, Martin Melcher, died in 1968, Doris discovered the shocking truth. She was nearly bankrupt. The man she had trusted to manage her finances, along with his lawyer, had squandered her fortune on bad investments and shady deals. Doris, who had worked tirelessly for decades, was left with nothing. Worse still, she learned that Melcher had signed her up for a television series without her knowledge. She had never agreed to star in the Doris Day Show, but now, with her finances in ruins, she had no choice. She took the role reluctantly, admitting later that she didn't even like the medium of television. Yet the show became a hit, running for 5 seasons and keeping her financially afloat. For fans, the revelation that Doris Day had been swindled was shocking. How could someone so successful, so beloved, be left penniless? But this was the reality of Hollywood at the time. Many stars, especially women, trusted their husbands or managers to handle their money, only to be betrayed. Doris was one of the highest-profile victims. She eventually sued her late husband's business partner and won a multi-million-dollar settlement. But the emotional damage was lasting. Doris had always valued trust and loyalty, and to discover that the man she had relied on most had left her destitute was a crushing blow. This secret reveals another side of Doris Day, the pragmatic survivor. She didn't wallow in self-pity. She rolled up her sleeves and went to work, even in a medium she didn't enjoy. She rebuilt her fortune not through luck, but through resilience. To the public, the Doris Day Show was just another project. To Doris, it was survival. And that's the fifth shocking secret. Doris Day, one of the wealthiest stars of her generation, was swindled into near bankruptcy by the very people she trusted most. Doris Day's only child, Terry Melcher, was the center of her world. Born from her first marriage, Terry grew up surrounded by his mother's fame. He went on to become a successful music producer in the 1960s, working with major bands and shaping the sound of the era. But their relationship was not always smooth. Terry sometimes resented living in his mother's shadow. Imagine being the son of one of the most famous women in America. No matter what he achieved, people always saw him as Doris Day's son. The pressure was immense, and it created tension between them. In the late 1960s, Terry became connected to one of the darkest stories in Hollywood history, the Manson family murders. He had previously rented a house to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, the home where the infamous killings took place. Some accounts suggest that Charles Manson himself may have targeted Terry, feeling rejected by him in the music industry. Doris, protective by nature, became even more anxious about her son's safety after the murders. Despite their rocky moments, Doris and Terry shared a deep bond. He remained close to her throughout her later years, helping her manage her affairs and supporting her animal welfare causes. But the relationship was layered with complexities: resentment, reconciliation, and the inescapable shadow of fame. The sixth secret is that Doris Day, despite her sunny image, struggled with the same family tensions that ordinary people face. She wasn't just America's sweetheart. She was a mother, doing her best in difficult circumstances, often making mistakes, and carrying the weight of her choices. If there was one cause that defined Doris Day's later life, it was her love of animals. Long before animal rights became a mainstream issue, Doris was fighting for it. She had always loved pets, often surrounding herself with dogs, and she used her fame to raise awareness about animal welfare. In 1978, she founded the Doris Day Animal Foundation, dedicated to rescuing and protecting animals. She also created the Doris Day Animal League, which focused on lobbying for better treatment of animals in legislation. While the public remembered her as a singer and actress, Doris herself considered this her most important work. What's shocking is how little recognition she received for it during her lifetime. Hollywood honored her for her films, her music, her wholesome image, but her tireless activism for animals was often overlooked. To Doris, however, it was her true calling. She once said that animals gave her the unconditional love and trust that humans so often failed to provide. This passion consumed her final decades. She rarely gave interviews, rarely appeared in public, but she poured her energy into saving animals. And in doing so, she found a kind of peace that fame had never given her. So the seventh secret of Doris Day's life is that her greatest legacy may not be her films or her songs, but the thousands of animals whose lives she touched and saved. For someone so famous, Doris Day's departure from this world was shockingly understated. When she passed away in 2019 at the age of 97, she left behind very specific instructions. No funeral, no memorial service, and no grave marker. She didn't want the fanfare, the tributes, or the spectacle that usually surrounds the death of a legend. She wanted to slip away quietly, just as she had lived her later life, out of the spotlight. This decision shocked many fans. How could a woman so beloved, so celebrated, choose anonymity in death? But to those who knew her best, it made perfect sense. Doris had spent decades retreating from fame, focusing on her animals, and avoiding the endless attention that came with her name. In her final act, she chose simplicity. She chose peace. And that is perhaps the most shocking secret of all, that Doris Day, one of the brightest stars Hollywood ever produced, chose to leave this world without fanfare. It was her final way of taking control of her narrative, of living and dying on her own terms. Doris Day was more than the image Hollywood created for her. She was more than the sparkling comedies, the golden voice, and the sunny persona. She was a woman who endured abuse, betrayal, and heartbreak. A woman who stumbled into a career she never planned for, who was swindled out of her fortune, who struggled as a mother, and who ultimately found her greatest joy not on screen, but in fighting for the voiceless. The 8 shocking secrets of her life don't diminish her legacy. They enrich it. They show us that behind the illusion was a real person, complicated and flawed, but also resilient and strong. Doris Day was not perfect. She was human. And that humanity, hidden for so long, makes her all the more remarkable.